Welcome to the Poolside Chat. Today we have Superintendent Richard Chapman and Assistant Superintendent of Business Administration Kimberly Vile on. We're going to talk about how this year has been an exceptionally hard year for the budget. We started out with a $22 million deficit that is now down to just $17 million. And thanks for coming on, guys.
Thank you.
So to start off, how have we gotten it from that 22 down to 17 million?
Yeah, just want to give an update. We are about 13 million now, so we've actually carved that down even more. So how did we get here as far as carving it back? We implemented some steps to really curb our spending. Those being, we had a budget freeze very early this year, which what we would do is we'd look at every purchase that came in, just making sure they were necessary, making sure teachers had what they needed to run their classrooms, make sure buildings had what they needed to function as well. But at the same time, just being mindful that if there was something exceptional that might not necessarily fit a classroom need or a very specific building need, that we carved that out. We also had a hiring freeze, and it was a soft hiring freeze, but we looked at every position that became available. If we had individuals retire mid-year, we would look at that and really decide if that's a position we should move forward with or not. Because we're trying to reduce our spending to keep from overspending this year. And so it's kind of a double whammy. We have a budget deficit next year, but we also don't want to overspend this year. And any money we save this year, we can help apply to next year, if that makes sense. So it's been tricky, and we've also applied some in that reduction. We've also applied savings that we would yield through staff reductions, unfortunately. And we are a business that is human-based, I guess. I refer to us as a business because you look at it, $222 million budget. Like if we were out in the private sector, would be a very large organization. So we are human-based, and any type of reduction, obviously, people get very tense and in some cases really hesitant to make decisions and whether we should reduce this position or that position. So in that, we have had a lot of conversations with a lot of different groups. I'm sure we'll talk about some of those groups as we go through these questions, but we've made some decisions to make some reductions, and we've been able to calculate what those will yield us as far as savings, and we've used that to carve back the gap from 22 to 17 down to 13.
And if I could just add, one of the things that was nice is Mr. Chapman and team went out to all of the buildings and talked to all of the faculty. So I think that helped us with the spending freeze that was in place, so people had some understanding of what we were going through as a district.
Yeah.
In regards to just this past Monday, there was April 6th. We had the board meeting.
Yes.
The Board of Education voted to delay a vote on the budget until the next meeting on the 20th.
Yes.
What is being done between now and then to kind of shape the budget into something you think they'll be more willing to pass?
Yeah, so the first thing that's occurred is we've had another BAT team. So we don't, the cabinet, myself, and the cabinet being the assistant superintendents, myself, we don't sit in isolation in a room and just come up with a budget. We have a budget advisory team. It's called the BAT team. We meet monthly, and sometimes we meet more than once a month to talk about the budget. And initially it started out with us looking at past budgets and forecasting, and we're using predictions at the onset of the process. As those predictions shifted from predictions to actually we're encumbering money and the numbers are becoming real, and we started to see our gap increase. We started sharing that with the team, and then we started soliciting ideas of how we can start combing that back. From there, we would meet with principals as well. We've had feedback coming from teachers. So first step was we had our BAT team meeting yesterday where we looked through all the changes we've gone through. I think we have a fiscally sound budget. It was created by the union leaders. We've had feedback from teachers. It's been created by the masses. So I feel like we'll take another crack at this budget with the board. At the same time, we're meeting with board members in small groups, and we're just going to answer their questions that they have. We'll share the information. I think it's just, we all want the same thing. I think that's what people have to understand. We're just coming at it from different directions, and everyone is approaching this with good intentions. And I think that's, the board feels they have the perspective, and how they are approaching this is, from feedback they're hearing from different people. I'm approaching it with the feedback I'm hearing, and I'll give an example. We had social workers on a list that potentially be reduced. When we met with principals, that was an area that, principals were like, we really could use our social worker. That would be a big help, especially with these other reductions. At the same time, the board was also coming forward saying, we really aren't comfortable with social workers. That was an area that everyone could agree on. So we went from 5 reductions to social workers. We currently have 1 reduction as social worker, and that's just because of the other supports that are offered in the building that social workers in.
I know originally the plan was with those 5 cuts, to bring in more external resources from Liberty Resources.
That's correct.
Are we still planning on going to that service?
It's happened. Yeah, so we have gained, buildings have gained, in some cases they have part-time Liberty Resource support, and they've gone to full-time. So we've had those added in as well. Once again, looking down the road a couple years, we'll have to see what reductions we have in years to come. But in the meantime, we're trying to reinforce what we have as far as resources we can offer students.
Do you think that those resources are equitable for students compared to what is already available and compared to the one social worker cut that is going to happen?
It's tough because so really I think that goes back to the question we struggle with all the time with with reductions. Is it going to impact students, right? And we'd like to say on the surface, oh no, we're going to make these cuts and it's not going to have any impact on students or any impact on programs. And that would be a lie, frankly, right? Like, we have cuts, and these cuts are deep. We're talking about 78 cuts. Will there be an impact? There absolutely. There's a student, every individual, every adult in this building, and then across the district, they're going to have relationships with students. That adult isn't there. That's going to have an impact on a child. Things are going to have to be done differently. People are going to have to, and I know do more with less. But I think it's more we're trying to get back to where we were a few years ago with the staff levels we've had. So as far as it being equal with what we have now, I think in some areas, yes, absolutely. But in other areas, will it be felt? It will. It would be naive to think that we're going to make reductions and everything's just going to be exactly the same.
Well, and I think you're going to see this across school districts. In the news even now, there's definitely a structural deficit issue going on. It's not just Liverpool.
Sure. Yeah.
Where do we think that structural issue came from?
Yeah, so you could go back and look at the foundation aid formula, health insurance. I mean, there's some things we always talk about things we can control and things we can't. And I think we are pretty good at controlling the different parts of our budget. And there's always areas we can trim and improve upon. Areas we can't control, for example, health insurance. We had a huge increase in our health insurance, and that's something we can't necessarily control. We're trying to take steps to get a better handle on it, and potentially find some cost savings that we can apply toward our future budget. But where did the structural deficit come from? It is how our healthcare is structured right now. The demographics of Liverpool, we have a higher poverty rate now than we did in 2003. Students with special needs are different, and some of the numbers of students with special needs that we support, that's going to weigh into it. E&L students, that's also an area that weighs into the formula that hasn't been adjusted over the years.
And in regards to that situation where we have declining enrollment but increasing enrollment of students with extra needs,
Sure.
How are we going to ensure that those people won't fall through the cracks when we see cuts to multi-tier system of support TAs? We see in the transportation department, a reduction in the number of smaller buses that we have, and we see bus attendants being cut.
Yeah, so some of the transportation component, just if you're a student with special needs, it doesn't necessarily mean you need a small bus or you need an attendant. If you are a student that needs assistance where attendance required, you could absolutely ride a large bus and have an attendant on that bus. So that one's probably the easiest to address. As far as like some of the demographics changing and the students that fall in those populations, a lot of those safeguards are built in. You have IEPs, which mandate certain supports that students need. So if you have a student that requires a one-to-one, that's decided on by a committee. If that's determined a student needs a one-to-one, they will get a one-to-one, right? So some of those safeguards are baked in. If you're a student that's new to the country or our school district, an E&L student, those services based on the assessments that are given to determine what level service you might need, those services will still be given. As far as the MTSS and the TAs we had a very unique model in Liverpool where we had some very specialized TAs. A lot of districts, they just basically have TAs, and that's what we've shifted to. We'll still have MTSS. We'll still have TAs working MTSS. It's just there's some flexibility, a shift where there's some flexibility where you might be working with a special needs student part of the day and maybe an MTSS group or a couple groups another part of the day. So we'll still have MTSS groups. We'll still have MTSS supports. It's just we might have different TAs working those groups and those supports.
What's the difference between MTSS and TAs?
MTSS is the multi-tiered system of support. That's really a framework that we provide support for students that might need extra support in reading, math, different subjects. TAs are teaching assistants. They're staff that often help provide those supports to students.
So they're all hired as teaching assistants, and then how we utilize them is really how this conversation is probably the easiest explained. By title, when they go to the board, they're appointed as a teaching assistant, and then how we choose to use them or what they focus during the day is different.
Sure, and that'll be determined amongst the buildings. And that's another conversation that's come up is like, what's the plan? And it's really the buildings working with their staff to come up with how they can make adjustments. I think that's probably the best way to go in a lot of ways. I mean, district office, we can give guidance, but our buildings are different, our staff are different, populations of students are different. So to allow the flexibility for buildings to come together, and I know some principals have done this already with their staff, and said, hey, we might have a reduction of 2 TAs. How can we make this work? And they're figuring it out. Once again, it might not always be easy conversations, but we can make those shifts work. So I think just really empowering buildings, and we have to give the direction. The district office has to give the direction, but at the same time, giving the buildings and the staff the ability to really have say in how those structures work within the building. I think that goes a long way.
And in regards to those conversations with people who may have their positions being terminated, what do those conversations look like? How are you guys communicating with them?
Yeah, so currently, until we have the budget passed, we're not reaching out to folks as far as officially, right, to have conversations with them. When that time comes, I do plan on working with the Assistant Superintendent for Human Resources. We will go to the buildings and we can meet with those people. I plan on being a part of those meetings as well.
There's a lot that has to go on behind the scenes, and there's a lot of rules that have to be followed. So until and that's a ever-changing situation too, because we have resignations coming in that could impact how that decision is going to be made in the future.
We had to complicate things even more. We had a retirement incentive. So we've had people that are retiring, people are separating, resigning, all these different moving parts. And so, what you ask is, why haven't we talked to folks? Because as that landscape changes, there might be a spot where someone slides into, where once again, if we went to them previously and said, hey, we apologize, we are reducing your position, then we'd go back, say, hey, just kidding, we actually have a position for you. We want to eliminate that as much as possible.
And so I was wondering, in our last interview, which was for the magazine, you said the further you get from the students, the more scrutiny you have to place on those positions. Sure. You also said the closer you become to the students, the harder of a decision it is to potentially make reductions. Does this still summarize and kind of describe your goals going into this process?
Yeah, it does, and there's a lot of, we often get a question that says, why are you focusing on cuts here and not here? And a question we get all the time, or a comment is, admin, cut more admin. We actually had a small discussion at the board meeting where, in these reductions, we're looking at 3 admin right now. And that would be about, a 16% decrease in admin. The area that's grown the largest, the area, let's say where TAs have grown, quite a bit over the last five years. we're looking at like a 5% decrease in that area. Our maintenance area, our buildings and grounds guys, you see them mowing the lawns and keeping our buildings together. There's been calls because, on the surface, they are away from students. However, they have a very important role. They're looking at about a 7% decrease. They're losing potentially 2 positions. So, when you look at it, we have administration around 16%. You have the buildings and grounds crews around 7%. And then the area that is more forward-facing toward with students, they're at a 5% decrease. So we're trying to really balance this. These are conversations that have gone on a lot behind the scenes with union leadership. Once again, not easy conversations, because you can imagine as we're talking to the director of that department, and you say we need to eliminate 2 positions, they're going to have a different opinion, right? I guarantee that. And we're going to have some conversations about why. So we do the best we can to not affect the forward-facing, but at the same time, the area of working with students is the area that's really grown tremendously over the last 5 to 10 years. So we do have to take a hard look at that.
So what kind of things go into that determination when it comes to picking, cuts should be made here, cuts should be made there, especially when the average principal salary at Liverpool High School is about 2.35 times that of the average teaching assistant salary?
Yeah. So going into that, when you're looking at the cuts, it really comes down to we need administrators for these roles, right? So like I said, we're removing 16% of our administrators. When you look at the teaching assistants, you start looking at what areas can we possibly become leaner in. And that's conversations with our budget originators, with our building principals. And believe it or not, you do have feedback coming in from different parts of the district saying, hey, we need to look at this area. So if you, let's say special ed, for example, with our special ed TAs, they've really focused a lot this year on if we have a student that, let's say, as they, they're working with a one-to-one, they're becoming more independent, they might not need that one-to-one anymore. And then we have another student that might be coming on that, maybe joining the district, that they will need a one-to-one. Are there ways we can switch a student from one-to-one to, let's say, 2-to-1, and then, share a TA? And by doing that, we create an opening. Therefore, we don't need that opening anymore. So as far as making the cuts, we do the best we can through attrition. But then ultimately, we do have to close a budget gap. And, restructuring with our TAs, going from those specialized TAs to more of a universal approach is what it's called as far as TAs. It allows us the flexibility to use TAs in different manners, where before we had TAs locked in as you're an MTSS TA, maybe you don't work with the special needs students, you're a special ed TA, you don't work with MTSS groups. By making it more universal, it allows us the flexibility to meet the needs of the students while identifying areas that we can become more efficient in, and that's where those reductions would come from.
Could you walk me through some of the cuts that are being made to specifically reading teachers and library media specialists, especially in an era where there is a lot of, seeing declining literacy rates nationwide and seeing kind of lots of misinformation and disinformation existing nowadays?
And just want to point out that every position is important, and it goes without saying, and that's what makes this so difficult. The reading positions kind of goes back to what I spoke of in the past, where some of those positions were brought in using the COVID money. That COVID money, when it ended, the positions initially the plan was then those positions would be discontinued. So in looking at the budget and getting feedback from building originators or budget originators, principals, my team, and we have to look to make cuts. Looking at those COVID folks first was kind of a natural step. So that was decided to make those. I still feel that we will have the ability through like the MTSS structure, the TAs that we have. I know reductions, but I still feel we can service the students where, and when the remaining reading teachers, because once again we have our enrollment that is dropping, so we still have the ability to service the students that need some extra help with reading. Library media specialist you brought up specifically. That is an area that they do have very specialized jobs. But once again, you look at enrollment, and we want to make sure we're maximizing our opportunities for our specialized staff to engage with students. So as enrollment drops and really starts becoming a math problem, you have so many sections you can get into a day, so many sections in a week, and then what we actually have for sections. The library media specialist or any special area or teacher or TA engaging with students. If we can find ways to maximize our ability for those specialized staff to work with students, we want to take advantage of it. By doing that, we also gives us an opportunity to reduce a position. So we're trying to, like I said, give more face time for our students with those individuals to have those very specific skills, but it does offer us a chance to reduce.
I heard at the board meeting someone bring up concerns that we're making too many cuts maybe to academic positions and that we should focus more on, I think they specifically brought up sport and fine art kind of positions. Have you given those positions any more thought or any more scrutiny since that meeting?
So it's funny because depending on who you talk to, it could be someone who may have cuts to fine arts, could be sports, could be CTE classes, right? So everyone has, like I mentioned earlier, everyone has a different perspective and a different way they want to approach this. Knowing the number of students who engage in those different programs, whether it's CTE, it's sports, it's fine arts, we want to try to keep those opportunities available. We're trying to limit reducing opportunities for students. At the same time, our staffing, we looked at that, and with even the percentages that we're cutting, we're trying to be very careful because we want to make sure we are very mindful of the forward-facing. Like I said earlier, the 5% reduction is fairly minimal compared to, let's say, look at the admin. We are having a significant reduction. Buildings and grounds is having a bit of a reduction, more so than forward-facing. But those programs, such as CTE, fine arts, athletics, they do impact a lot of students. I had someone brought up, like, we need our kids to read and to learn to read, write, and do math. We can. We look across the district, our high school students, we can read, write, and do math. We have some kids that can do it sometimes a little bit better than others. We'll work on improving those skills for those kids that need a little extra help, but we're doing a nice job here. I think that sometimes gets lost in this conversation, but we have students that are, I think, very well prepared to go out into the world, whether it's college, the military, or workforce, and I don't think we're losing anything there at all. And as far as the cuts as we're moving into this new landscape that we're facing the next couple of years.
Okay. In our last interview, again, for the magazine, you told me that it had to pass by the 24th, I think was the date that you gave.
Yeah. We wanted to, I think the 27th is the drop dead date at this point.
24th is Friday before, so
Friday
we were
before,
being
so yeah.
proactive.
Yeah, so and there's certain deadlines with the budget report card that have to be submitted to the state, and there's some hard deadlines we have to have. There is we have a board meeting on the 20th. We anticipate our budget will pass, and we'll at that point we can move forward with really focusing on how we're going to navigate these shifts.
Right now, what's your ideal drop down to point? I know you're at 13 million right now. Of course, zero is
my ideal.
Of course, zero is the most ideal, but for this year, what are we trying to get down to?
So this year we're trying to get that $13 million gap is really where we're going to land. Mm-hmm. Ideally, going into this, I was hoping to get down to about 10 million. But to your point earlier, when you look at some of the mandates that we have, whether it's special ed or let's say E&L, we had to really look at those, and we could be aggressive, but then we might start impacting students. And there's mandates that doesn't allow us to do that. So we had to adjust the number. So it's important to understand that this wasn't the first time we rolled the budget out, back in, and started putting these are potential reductions. Mm-hmm. That list has evolved some ways multiple times over the months. And to your point, asking about athletics and fine arts, and down the road, if you look back when Dr. Johns was here as a superintendent, a couple superintendents ago, there were cuts that started to impact different programs. And even after that meeting, I had a community member or two reach out and say, please, do your best not to, you cut these programs. There is some savings there, but and Dr. Potter used to use this saying, the former superintendent of Liverpool, is the juice worth the squeeze, right? So you have to be very careful and weigh that. Like, we're going to, really squeeze this budget, but we have to make sure what we're getting out of it is worthwhile.
So I would just like to add to Mr. Chapman is if you're talking about that question differently in regards to, long-term sustainability, we are in a position where it's going to take us years to recover from where we are right now. Mm-hmm. So really to have a sustainable budget over time, we have to get to the point where our expenses are being sustained from our renewable revenues and not have what we call these gaps where we're putting in the district savings. And I think you do a good job of explaining what that means.
So it means you want me to do that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So basically, so just our district savings. So we have our renewable revenues, our taxes, and some other revenues. Let's say that's like $203 million. We have our proposed budget. Let's say it's $222 million. That gap is where we call it our piggy bank in some cases. When we've gone to the public and we go to our buildings, we talk about we have to pull money out of our piggy bank. It's not quite that easy. There are some restrictions and some guidelines in what lines we can spend even within our piggy bank to fill that gap. But we can take that money, move it over. So once again, we talked about controlling our spending. We move over $13 million. We don't want to spend that. If we do, then we have a big gap. And then our piggy bank becomes depleted to eventually it would just be a broken piggy bank. There's nothing left, right? And that's what we're really trying to avoid. That's what Mrs. Vile's saying here is we need to be sustainable with just the revenue that's the renewable revenue coming in, and because we can't. It's not good practice at all to keep pulling money out of your bank to balance the budget. Eventually, your savings account will be depleted. Okay.
What would you say to the Liverpool community, the student body, the teachers, as we're approaching this kind of last budget vote and as we're closing in on passing our final budget?
Really, just what I mentioned as far as it has been a very much a group approach, and I shared early in this conversation that we all have the best intentions for our students. It's just how we get there. So I know on social media there's all sorts of buzz, and I try not to pay a lot of attention to it. But it's near impossible because people send things, and there's some people that are very thoughtful on social media that absolutely understand the process, and others it's just throwing things out there. I'm like, I don't know where this even came from. But that's the world we live in, right? And so we have to deal with it. So I guess to just kind of from my perspective, we all have the best interests of the students, and I don't think anyone doubts that. And how we get there, as far as balancing our budget, because we do need a balanced budget, and we need to be on a track that allows us to balance our budget consistently year after year after year. No one wants to go through this process where we're talking about cuts every single year or every 3 years or every 5 years. So we are in it together. The units are working together. The district's working together. There's going to be some changes in the district. Just because we are having reductions, therefore we're going to have to do some things a little bit different. We will make it through. We will still be a very strong district. We'll be a safe district. We'll be one of the top districts in the area. I believe that. So we're going to keep plugging away, and and I do value the feedback, whether it's in Wegmans, my neighborhood, when people come up and say, "Can I talk to you about the budget?" And we do hear the pieces from all over. And we do appreciate that feedback, and we are all working very hard to get this budget balanced and give you, the students, the best opportunities we possibly can.
Thank you guys so much for coming on. Thanks for tuning in. Make sure to stay tuned. May 7th, we're going to have the public hearing for the budget, and May 19th will be the public vote. Keep up as we continue to cover the budget. Thank you guys so much.
Thanks for having us. Appreciate it.